I was perusing through YouTube when I stumbled on a video from Suspect Green called I Watched Mark Hamill's Other Sci-Fi Movies. Among these movies, Suspect Green also discussed Hamill's role in Wing Commander 3 and 4, both video games from the 90s, and for whatever reason, that really caught my attention. Maybe it was because I was interested in the novelty of playing an old game or seeing those live action cutscenes for myself, but I wanted to check out Wing Commander for myself, starting with the first game. It was simple enough to find and cheap enough to purchase, so soon enough I found myself playing it and having a relatively good time. It was neat playing through something that was once cutting edge so long ago and learning all the different controls and gameplay peculiarities that went into it. However, once I reached about the halfway point in the game, I began to experience more and more slowdowns in the game, which quickly became a slideshow experience. Some slowdown is fine, I dealt with it up to that point, but it becomes a bit unplayable after a certain point. So, looking online, I found I can change the game speed in the config files, so I increased it so I wouldn't have to deal with so much slowdown. I was able to beat the game, though still somewhat painfully, but it was an issue that stopped me from going into its expansions, where the issue was much, much worse. The problem was also worse when I tried out Wing Commander 2, where messing with the speed settings didn't seem to improve anything, and the slowdowns also caused my weapons to fire continuously without my control. After trying for a while to fix things, I took a break and decided to set Wing Commander aside for a while, which is a shame because, from what I experienced, the first two games are surprisingly fun experiences held back by their technical issues that probably stop a lot of people from playing them. Playing Wing Commander had both given and failed to scratch the itch I now had for old space sims, so I started looking around for something that could. In my search for a game that could, I stumbled upon Freespace 2. Like Wing Commander, Freespace was a game straight out of the 90s, but from the end of the decade rather than the beginning. And it really is crazy to see what a difference a decade can make in graphical and art style changes. Unfortunately, that age also somewhat scared me off from playing it. What if I had just as many issues as Wing Commander? Sure enough, plenty of people had issues with Freespace 2 not working. In fact, if you try yourself, you might not even be able to get the game to boot. Thankfully, this time, there is a solution, provided by a passionate community of modders that have not only kept the game playable, but have provided a plethora of fixes and graphical enhancements for the game, even allowing you to play the original Freespace and several community-made campaigns. And so, I was finally able to play a game that was able to scratch the itch that I'd gotten from watching that video so long ago. And today, I want to show you why this 90s space sim just might do the same for you. For being over 2 decades old, the Freespace games are surprisingly modern. From the presentation of its story to the features of its gameplay, Freespace wouldn't really feel out of place as a modern game release. In fact, if you've been hesitant to pick up space sims due to their infinite complexity, you could do a lot worse than Freespace. Where games like X4 Foundations offer a lot more in terms of gameplay with dynamic trading and economy systems, ship customizations, station building, and more, Freespace focuses solely on space combat gameplay, with dogfights making up the bread and butter of gameplay. However, that doesn't mean Freespace's gameplay is dull, far from it. Having one sole focus in its gameplay allows Freespace the freedom to add a lot of depth to it, with numerous enemy ships to fight, objectives and scenarios to face, and plenty of customization options to tackle them. And even with its graphical enhancements by the FSL community, Freespace still oozes plenty of 90s charm. Aside from the intro cutscene, the first thing to greet you will be Freespace's charming interactive menu scene. It's something you don't see in a lot of games anymore, usually placed in favor of a simple title screen. It may seem like a small difference, as ultimately they both serve the same function, but Freespace's menu really helps pull you into the game. From the moment you begin the game, you're stationed on a lone capital ship, you and the crew against the vast unknown. Often, the only thing standing between you and that unknown is the thin hull of your ship, and the best chance you have at survival is mastering every aspect of it. The first aspect to master is ship choice. Most missions allow you to choose from a diverse ship set, from quick interceptor ships to sluggish bombers, and it's up to you to pick the best ships not only for yourself, but for the squadrons under your command. You'll gain access to 7 ships throughout the campaign, starting with the basic but versatile Apollo. Being the first ship, the Apollo lets you get a taste of all elements of ship gameplay. Decently tough, decently fast, and decent arm space, the Apollo becomes the baseline that you'll compare the other ships to. A trend you'll notice after leaving the Apollo is that speed has an inverse relationship to firepower and ship health. A good example is comparing the fast interceptor fighter, the Valkyrie, to the tank that is the Ursa bomber. The Valkyrie is incredibly fast, letting it easily outmaneuver enemy craft, or allowing it to intercept bombs launched at objectives. But if you don't use its speed carefully, you'll quickly be blown to smithereens. On the other hand, the Ursa is extremely slow, even struggling to turn, but this is offset by its tanky hull and shields, allowing it to take capital ships head-on to launch its payloads. Each of the 7 ships falls within a spectrum of fast interceptor to slow bomber, with the Apollo right in between. Because of this, it becomes essential to balance out each ship's strengths and weaknesses within your assigned squads. Typically, you'll be assigned at least 1 squad, but can have as many as 3 to 4 under your command during a mission. Each squad consists of 4 ships, with your main squad seeing 3 ships flying on your wing. The missions will ultimately determine what you need to succeed. While there are variations in the mission structure, there are effectively 7 mission types in Freespace: Escort, Recon, Capital Ship Assault, Interception, Cargo Raid, Ship Capture, and Espionage. These missions can be boiled down even more simply: attacking and protecting, often switching between the two mid-mission. Interceptors like the Valkyrie are best at moving between ships to attack, or quickly moving to defend stationary objectives or the slow bomber ships. Versatile ships like the Apollo and Hercules are also good at these roles to a lesser extent, as well as putting more pressure on capital ships and transports. Bombers like the Athena, Medusa, and Ursa are best at attacking large objectives like capital ships and transports, and need to be defended because of their low speed. This isn't the end of things you have to consider before a mission, as you also have to configure each ship's weapon loadout as well. Among your primary weapons, energy weapons primarily, and your secondary weapons, missiles and bombs, there are 3 roles: anti-hull, anti-shield, and anti-subsystems. Anti-shield and anti-hull weapons are fairly straightforward. Blast through a ship's shield with a weapon like the Banshee or Flail rifle, then shred through the hull with a weapon like the Avenger or Prometheus cannon. The more interesting weapons are the anti-subsystem weapons. These weapons allow you to specifically target and destroy parts of a ship like the engines, comms, or weapon systems. While some missions require you to use these to disable parts on large ships to capture them, they can also be used on individual fighters to break them down. Weapons like the Disruptor and Stiletto missile make it easy to deal with dangerous elements on capital ships as well, like laser turrets. And so, it becomes necessary to balance all these elements for each mission, both for yourself and your squad. Thankfully, the game prepares you for each mission with a thorough briefing by your commanding officer, laying out mission objectives, resources, and possible threats that you'll face. Additionally, your squad will usually be appropriately kitted out for each mission, though you'll have to do some tweaking on some missions. But where Freespace really shines are the missions that don't go to plan, where you're ambushed or encounter enemies you didn't build for, and have to use your available resources and squad command skills to survive. Speaking of survival, you can't do that if you don't understand your ship. While Freespace does provide plenty of tutorials, they are a bit dry, probably on purpose, but it is still valuable to discuss your ship's features. The most essential features of your ship's HUD are located at the center of your screen. The most obvious in the direct center is the crosshair, telling you where your ship will fire its weapons. Along the lower right semicircle are circle and triangle indicators. These tell you your current active weapons, filling in the circles for your primary weapons and the triangles for your missiles. Just beyond that is the bar showing your primary weapon's charge. Use it all up, and you'll have to wait for it to refill to fire again. The gauge along the lower left semicircle shows your current KPS, or kilometers per second, with the outer bar showing how much afterburner you have. The gauges along the top show when you're being targeted by an enemy or when they gain a missile lock on you. Freespace does a great job at keeping all of this essential information directly in front of you, letting you know multiple aspects of your ship at a glance so you could focus on the action. Additionally, when you target an enemy ship, its current health will be displayed just below your crosshair, and arrows will appear along the outside of the circle when the target sweeps out of view. The outside of your HUD will show more tertiary information like current objectives, priority targets, targeted ship info, weapons, kills, etc. However, one of the most important pieces of your HUD is the radar, showing ship positions in relation to you. At first, it might be hard to understand the 3D space this flat circle displays, but it's fairly simple. Anything near the center of the circle is generally in front of your ship, with the further from the center meaning that they are farther out of your view. Anything along the edges are behind you. The radar is one of the features I feel the older Wing Commander games did better, as while both used the same system, Wing Commander told you more with what it gave you. With Wing Commander, the extra circles better told what was directly in front and behind you, and knowing these things is essential in ship combat. With Freespace's radar, I don't know if these ships are in front or beside me, or if these are beside or behind me. With Wing Commander, I understand. In front, beside, behind. Another issue with Freespace's radar is that there are a lot of ships to keep track of, with the radar's only distinguishing feature between ships being a color change. Red dots for enemies, green for allies. Because of this, you can't just rely on the radar alone to locate enemies. It's more there to keep a general eye on what's around you. Other things to keep track of are your ship's shield and hull integrity, as well as energy distribution. Your shield, primary weapons, and engines all use energy, which you can distribute based on your needs. Need more firepower? Boost your weapons at the cost of shields or speed. Need to be tanky? Drain your engines or weapons. Additionally, you can redistribute power from areas of your shield to boost others. For example, if attacking a capital ship head-on, you can drain your rear and side shields to boost your forward shields. You also have countermeasures to defend yourself from enemy missiles, and these can be a bit tricky to use. You typically want to wait for them to get close, as indicated by the missile lock instrument beeping quicker, before doing a sharp turn and deploying several in the hopes that they break the lock. And don't worry, you'll get plenty of missiles launched at you throughout your playthrough. Finally, there is understanding how to take out enemy ships. There are a variety of ways to target an enemy ship, with the most common being the hostile ship targeter. This will do several things: show the ship's distance, speed, health, type, as well as show a targeting reticle in front of the ship. Since your weapons take time to travel, you have to lead your shots to hit the ship, with this targeting reticule guiding you where to lead the shots. However, you can't always rely on it, especially if the enemy is pulling some kind of maneuver, so you'll also have to get a feel for your ship's weapons as well. Finally, if using a lock-on missile, a diamond will slowly lock onto the enemy ship, being as quick as a few seconds or tens of seconds if using a bomb. And that's a lot. And that's not even getting into commanding your squad, sending them to defend objectives, or attack a target, or cover your wing. But a lot of these systems will quickly become second nature, and the efficient use of HUD space means that Freespace is usually feeding you the information you need to stay alive. And the nice thing is that these aspects are consistent throughout Freespace, its expansions, and its sequel. So once they're learned, you'll never have to relearn them. As someone with limited experience with these types of games, I found that Freespace makes sure most of its mechanics are easy to pick up and remain useful throughout your playthrough. If any of these mechanics drew your interest, I highly encourage you to try out Freespace, because you get a lot of bang for your buck playing these games. Now, the story of Freespace is somewhat interesting because I've never played a game before that focuses so heavily on story without relying on an interesting cast of characters. In fact, in the first Freespace, there really aren't any characters at all. The most you'll get is the names and orders of your commanding officers. Most times, you won't even know the names of your fellow pilots. They'll only be designated by their squad position. In a lot of ways, these ships have much more character than the people in Freespace. For example, your main capital ship, the Galatea, almost becomes a beacon against the void. More than your home, it's the rock that keeps you safe. Your own ships have such distinct designs that you can immediately recognize their roles in battle, though you'll often be more up close and personal with the enemy ships than your own. For example, your alien enemies, the Vesudans, have such striking ships compared to your own. The Terran, human ships are very militaristic and utilitarian, taking a lot of inspiration from 80s and 90s sci-fi design. In comparison, the Vesudan ships can be both clean and sleek, and thick and bulbous. They feel like they'd be just as much at home in the open ocean as they do in space. In contrast to these two design philosophies are the Shivan ships, the last alien race in the game. These ships are black and red, and seem to throw in spikes wherever they can. If you ask someone to design ships that looked evil, these are probably what they would come up with. Because of these ship designs, you can learn a lot about each race without ever talking to enemy characters, which is good because ships do all the heavy lifting in the story. A story full of non-stop action. Before being thrown into any mission, you're always briefed on your mission objectives, potential targets and threats, as well as your allies and resources. It's also here that you'll have the chance to customize your own and your squad ships. As you progress further through the game, it becomes important not to take these briefings at face value, as you'll often have to react to new objectives and threats during the mission. Likewise, outfitting your squad becomes more important, as devoting yourself entirely to one objective presented in the briefing can leave you open to new threats during the mission. Freespace begins with a simple premise. Humanity has been locked in a 14-year war with an alien race known as the Vesudans. While Freespace doesn't give much info about the war itself, it is known that it may have been started due to misunderstandings during First Contact, and perhaps continued due to each side's desire for expansion. This is an interesting perspective for the player. I initially wanted to know more about this war. Who are the Vesudans? Why are we fighting them, and for so long? At the same time, Freespace isn't really about this war, or even about the Vesudans. At this point in the story, they're the enemy. Is there any more you really need to know? It's with this limited information that we're thrust into our first mission aboard the GTD Galatea, guard duty. We're assigned a simple guard mission to protect the GTC Orf, which was damaged in an earlier scuffle. After engaging in our first combat scenario, we go on several more combat missions against the Vesudans, but something is lurking in the background. The first sign that something is wrong is during the 5th mission. We're assigned to hunt down and capture a group of Terran defectors led by Lieutenant Alex McCarthy and recover technology they stole. There's 2 interesting things learned here during the briefing. First, that Terrans can defect to the Vesudan side, and 2, that the Terrans employ Vesudan agents. What this means is that this 14-year-long war isn't necessarily about race. Neither side seems hell-bent on exterminating the other, so maybe it's more of a war of governments and territory. Regardless, questions remain about why McCarthy defected. During the engagement with his forces, we get hints from the traders that something else is lurking in space, that there is now a third actor in the war intent on attacking the other 2 sides. Mentioned by one of the pilots is an incident in Ross 128b, and while it's unclear what happened there, it's most likely what was shown during the intro cutscene. Regardless, the traders are concerned about this third threat, an existential threat they claim, and are sharing technology with the Vesudans in the hope that both sides can stand against it together. But we haven't seen that threat, and we have our orders, so we bring McCarthy in as a traitor. The next mission sees us on an escort mission,
guarding the prototype weapons McCarthy stole to a jump node. While intelligence expects an assault from a Vasudan cruiser called the Taurus, resistance should otherwise be minimal. And for the most part, that's exactly how things play out. We fight off a few wings of Vasudan fighters before the Taurus jumps in to attack. Unfortunately, things don't always go to plan. As soon as the Taurus warps in, we pick up several additional warp signatures. Not more Vasudans, but something else. They quickly take out the Taurus before turning their attention to us. Quickly engaged in combat, we're immediately at a disadvantage as our targeting computers can't even get a lock, so we're stuck with manually aiming. Even if we do get a hit in, the ships have such thick shields that we can't even penetrate to their hull. We're just barely able to complete our mission and escape with our lives. It seems that McCarthy's fears weren't unfounded. There is something else out there. In the next mission, we get a glimpse into how desperate things have already become. This new threat, designated as the Shivans, have decimated both the Terrans and Vasudans, taking over at least 10 contested systems, and are showing no signs of stopping. The situation is so bad that the Vasudans immediately call for a ceasefire, an understandable response given the losses. Because of this ceasefire, the Terran military is remobilized, which, after a brief escort mission, sees us transferred to the GTD Bastion. Our first mission is an incredibly important one, raiding a Shivan supply depot in an effort to steal their technology, with the most important being their shield technology. This mission is pretty fun as the depot starts mostly unguarded, with its only protection being a few sentry turrets. But things quickly spiral out of control as the supply depot explodes and several Shivan ships warp in, including a small cruiser. Amid the cries of panic from your allies, you have to evade fire and scan what little of the depot remains before making your escape. While we weren't able to recover any shield technology, we were able to gather their sensor tech, allowing us to actually target their ships. And thankfully, our raid was one of many, with another successful operation securing that shield technology. With this, we're finally able to take the fight to the Shivans, as Terran and Vasudan scientists have updated our targeting systems and distributed the new Avenger cannons to take out the Shivan shields. We get to test our new weapons in yet another escort mission, this time guarding the stolen shield prototypes so that they can reach Earth. And of course, another wrench is thrown into the works to make things more difficult. While attacks by the Shivans are expected, we're also assaulted by a fourth faction, the Hammer of Light. This is where the storytelling of the game falters somewhat. I've already explained that the story is fairly simplistic, which, considering the time frame the game was made and the focus it has on gameplay, is quite understandable. The problem with the Hammer of Light is that they feel almost like an excuse to fight more Vasudan ships, which is fair. They made all those assets, so they kind of need to use them. But you hardly get any explanation from the game on who they are and what they want. The most the game will tell you is that they're an extremist Vasudan group aiding the Shivans, based on an old doomsday religion. And that's it. Kind of. See that fast-moving text there? Let's slow that down for a second. It almost seems like there's a detailed history of the Hammer of Light, going in depth into their religious beliefs. Why is it in a fast-moving text you'd only be able to read if you're recording? If you miss this text, which you probably will, one of the major enemy factions gets only 4 lines of text explaining them. I think that's pretty significant. But now that we've paused, let's take a little look back at that text. Surprisingly, this skippable text is a treasure trove of information not only on the Hammer of Light, but on the Vasudan race as a whole. One of the biggest things we learn about the Vasudans is their so-called obsession with history. While the text itself doesn't go into much detail about this, we can infer that the Vasudans have a lot of reverence and pride in their history, possibly explaining why they still have an emperor despite using a parliamentary system. This powerful reverence has caused certain Vasudans to believe the Shivans are the, quote, cosmic redeemers and destroyers written about in their ancient history. Essentially, the Hammer of Light believes the Shivans represent a kind of judgment day, cleansing the Vasoon race so that they may meet their maker, and they believe it is their holy duty to aid in this endeavor, to save the rest of their kind and prove their own devotion. While the 4 lines we do get about the Hammer of Light aren't false, they don't give as wide a picture as the yellow text does about who they are and why they've sided with this genocidal alien race. Back to the mission, despite the Shivans and Hammer of Light's interference, we're able to secure the stolen shield prototypes, allowing our scientists to implement shields throughout the Allied fleets. With this new tech, the Terran-Vasoon alliance is finally able to take the offensive against the Shivans and the Hammer of Light. The most significant operation is the capture of a Shivan cruiser called the Tyrannus, an operation that could lead to a significant breakthrough in understanding the Shivans. The capture is a hard-fought battle as wave after wave after wave of Shivan fighters attempt to destroy the Tyrannus, and much of my wings are lost in the defense of it, but eventually we're able to capture it. However, on the cusp of what seemed like a major victory, of course, something goes wrong. The Tyrannus, as well as the station it was towed to, was destroyed by a massive Shivan cruiser designated Lucifer. Despite numerical superiority, the Terran and Vasoon ships were destroyed by the Lucifer, unable to even scratch the massive ship due to its powerful shield. At this point, the Shivans have taken 13 systems, not bothering to control the individual planets or gathering resources, but focusing on locking down each system's jump nodes. The Shivans seem to be an almost unstoppable threat, and the Lucifer is just a further reinforcement of that idea. But there is still a chance. Throughout several more missions, we learn of the existence of a previously unknown alien race, termed the Ancients. Through their ruins, we learn that the Shivans have been exterminating alien species for millennia, a seemingly endless cycle of destruction and rebirth. While this makes the current predicament seem even more impossible to survive, there is one glimmer of hope. There is a way to disable the Lucifer's shields. In their last days alive, the Ancients found that the Lucifer's shields were disabled as it traveled through subspace. And so, as more and more systems fall, including the Vasoon homeworld, a desperate race begins to intercept and destroy the Lucifer before it can destroy Earth. Catching such a massive ship is harder than it seems. With most of the fleet out of the way, only the GTD Bastion is able to intercept the Lucifer in time. Even doing its best to catch the Lucifer, however, the Bastion itself is too slow. It's up to us and 3 other wings of ships to catch up with the Lucifer in subspace and destroy it. It's a race to the jump point, leaving behind the Bastion, dodging enemy fire, and protecting the 4 bombers, but eventually we're able to jump. And when we do, subspace isn't somewhere you should be. Compared to the intense battle music from before, this climax is eerie. The Lucifer, and by extension the Shivans, are less like aliens and more like cosmic horrors. Unstoppable, all-consuming, unknowable. But we have one chance to strike back and keep Earth safe. It all depends on keeping our bombers safe so they can destroy the Lucifer's reactors. Despite the odds, on the cusp of reaching Earth, we are able to beat them. With the Shivan's flagship destroyed, the remains of the Terran-Vasoon alliance are able to rout the remaining forces and slowly rebuild. That final victory didn't come without cost, though. Destroying the Lucifer in subspace also led to the destruction of the subspace tunnel. Earth is, perhaps forever, cut off. At its heart, the story of Freespace is really simple. You're the underdog against an unknowable, uncompromising threat. A threat that wants to wipe out everything that you know and have fought for. I think Freespace makes the right choice of knowing its limitations and keeping its gameplay focused on action, though sometimes I do feel it needs to explain more, such as with the Hammer of Light. However, I think Freespace does itself a massive favor by never explaining the Shivans, who they are or what they even want. We don't even really know what they look like, outside of one cutscene, and even then, it's unclear if what we see are actually the Shivans. Freespace has incredibly solid gameplay, a testament to over a decade of space sim development from many games before it, and has plenty of 90s charm, with my favorite being the incredible music. If you've been wanting to pick up Freespace or just try space sims in general, try Freespace and its sequel and expansions, or even try the community made content. But for now, that's all for me. So I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you next time.